Did you know that Riot knows and intentionally leaves in ways for you to cheat in League? And you won't be banned because they're not bugs, they're features. Karthus ult is one of the longest cooldowns in the game, and for good reason. It's one of the strongest abilities by far. But if we know how ability damage is calculated, we can do a lot to break it. If you're in base and want to ult, go ahead and sell all of your items. Then buy as much ability haste as you possibly can. We recommend you make an item set with the highest cooldown reduction items available, as well as Kindle gems, so you can do this really quickly. Then press R and quickly undo everything back to your original items. What's weird is that you will now have a much shorter cooldown on your ultimate, but you'll also do the exact same damage as if you had just ulted without doing any of this. Basically, you do the same damage, but your ult now comes back much faster. Many of these weird quirks exist in League, and because you liked our last video on this, we're including some more super niche pieces of information that you can take advantage of in your games to get the leg up on your opponents. There's no instruction manual for League, and many of these mechanics are not described anywhere. You'll only find out about them if you play the game for thousands and thousands of hours and hope to stumble onto them, or if you watch this video. So let's get right into it. That Karthus ult trick works for a few reasons. And if we understand how the game is coded, we can actually use this to abuse other weird interactions. Notably, abilities have two separate checks that occur at different times depending on the skill. The first check is for cooldown reduction and mana cost. The second checks for damage. So in the Karthus example, the first check happens when you start his channel, and the second check happens as it completes casting, which makes the undo trick work. For another application, many abilities actually increase in mana cost as they go up in level. So another idea is that you can actually level up an ability after casting it, before it hits your opponent. You'll benefit from the reduced mana cost that it had when you cast it, but still get the increased damage from the skill up, letting you literally cheat the mana cost. Almost all projectiles work like this, but some other abilities, notably melee abilities, have the checks happen at different times. Nocturne, for example, has a massive AD ratio on his ultimate that's built in, and a huge AD buff on his Q trail. Most players will just press R and Q midair to hit their opponent, but this doesn't benefit from the Q bonus AD because the check doesn't happen when Nocturne makes contact with his opponent. To get the maximum amount of damage, we need to abuse the concept we just talked about. Nocturne's check for damage actually occurs as you reactivate R to launch yourself at a target. So you actually want to Q before you even press R, sit on your trail, and reactivate R as your Q is about to fade on the ground. This way, you can still Q as you get to your opponent, and you get the increased damage from having 60 more AD, which is way more than a BF sword. Now, if you want a tip on how to increase your win rate, well, that's easy. Just head on over to our website, skillcap.com. We have the highest number of courses on the entire internet that are specifically designed to accelerate your improvement as fast as possible. Live commentaries where a challenger player teaches you how to escape the exact rank you're stuck in, and one-on-one coaching. We've got all the tools to supercharge your improvement. The best part, our service is completely risk-free to try as you're kept safe with rank up insurance. If you don't significantly improve while actively using SkillCap, you get your money back, no questions asked. So click the link in the description below to start improving fast and get the rank you've always wanted. Now back to the guide. Now, one weird thing about League is that ability warding is not consistent at all. Zed ult's description literally reads dashes to his opponent. Yet if you ult Talia on her E, it will not proc, kind of unsurprisingly, but it does specifically mention dashes. Meanwhile, Kalista ult says that it renders its target invulnerable and untargetable, yet you still get things like this happening where you can die in Kalista ult. So what's the difference? Turns out the coding in the game doesn't match descriptions, and you really just have to test abilities to see how they work. Kalista ult actually only makes you invulnerable for the first half of it. Once you click to launch yourself at your target, you will technically be targetable even though your character model and health bar are not yet visible. This is actually useful to know because you intentionally can block skill shots from your opponents that are aiming towards your teammate. You can also avoid a lot of questionable interactions by knowing that you can take damage, and maybe you'll wait a little bit longer before coming out of Kalista ult. Okay. Here's a quiz question. If Shen, Sejuani, and Gragas all have abilities that collide with opponents to activate their effects, if they all use their dashes at once, which ability wins? In other games like Smash, there sometimes exists a mechanic called clanking, where the two abilities will cancel each other out, or sometimes abilities will both collide, or one will simply always win. This often uses a sort of rock, paper, scissors system called priority, where abilities have a sort of tiered ranking, and you can know exactly which one will override the others based on their tier. It's thought that a similar system exists in League, but in order to try to understand how it works, you need to have a good understanding of two concepts: hitboxes and hurtboxes. Hitboxes are attached to any projectile or ability that makes contact with an opponent. All hitboxes in League are either circular or rectangular. So for something like an Ashel, visually you would expect the entire arrow to be able to connect with your opponent, when in reality, it's just the arrowhead that has a singular hitbox, and a really weird one at that. In order to actually collide with an opponent, it uses what's called their hurtbox. This is a range around a target that when a hitbox collides with, the ability will affect them. These are often very different visually from what character models look like. Hurtboxes are always circular, so champions like Aurelion Sol can look a little bit weird when it comes to abilities colliding with them. That being said, if we go back to the proposed question of what ability wins here, we need to know what their hitboxes and hurtboxes look like. This unfortunately isn't detailed anywhere, so we had to do a ton of testing. It turns out that League is quite strange when it comes to its priority system. There are some champions that will simply always win their exchanges. Alistar is probably one of the worst champions in the game, hitbox wise at least, because his W hitbox is so small, almost everything will cancel his headbutt, and he beats almost no one. This is likely because of Alistar's hurtbox actually being bigger than his W hitbox. So if he collides with any ability, it will hit him first before his W gets a chance to do anything. For example, Rammus is actually completely immune to Alistar W just while using Q. And this is likely because Rammus's hurtbox is hidden inside of his bigger Q hitbox. Alistar's W simply doesn't have the range to reach the Rammus's hurtbox before Rammus Q reaches Alistar's. For other champions like Quinn, they also just seem to lose against a plethora of other champions. Again, probably because of their hitbox and hurtbox being so small. Then we can look at some of the heavy hitters. Gragas notoriously has a ridiculous E hitbox, and this is most likely because his E hitbox extends a fair bit past his own hurtbox. But this doesn't mean that there isn't jank. Not only can the same ability yield different results when used at different timings, but the rock, paper, scissors system just seems to not exist at all. For example, Gragas and Sedge colliding can result in Gragas winning, them both trading, or Sejuani straight up winning. Note that clanking in League doesn't exist. Abilities will never just cancel each other out. They will just both happen at the same time. It's likely that at different times in their animations, their hitboxes on their abilities are different distances away from their hurtbox, leading to some inconsistencies depending on when the abilities are used. However, in Gragas versus Shen, the abilities are always consistent. Both will always go through and trade with each other. If we use this to try and predict what happens when Sejuani is versus Shen, we'd expect something similar, because Sejuani and Gragas can have all three different interactions. However, Sejuani just straight up beats Shen in every situation. What? Truthfully, what this means is that it's really hard to know when you're going to get any consistent interaction. It pretty much works on a complete case-by-case basis, which is really dumb if you ask me. We probably need access to the game's source code to figure this one out, but essentially, it's best not to try and cancel out other people's abilities unless you are 100% sure of that specific interaction. Sometimes you'll just waste a spell. If you know generally how good or bad your hitbox is, it can help, but even in those cases, some specific champions might just have weird interactions. If any rioters want to chime in on why this happens, or viewers want to test, please let me know if you find anything else. For now, I'm just going with spaghetti code. If you've ever wondered what it would be like to have a legal aimbot in League, wonder no more. Ezreal Q can actually be made to be unmissable. No BS. After using Arcane Shift, Ezreal will actually face towards his target. For some reason, if you buffer a Q during E and don't move your cursor, the Q will aim straight towards the opponent as well, even though your cursor is facing in a completely different direction. This does require your cursor to be inside of your E range when using it, so it's most useful when you're chasing someone or eing into a bush with no vision. In case this wasn't enough, there are actually some other really ridiculous ideas out there as well. Most people know that you can use F keys to target your allies and move your camera. If your teammates move around, so will your camera and, of course, your cursor. So we can target our teammates, but what if we could target enemies as well? Well, if you have a Kayn on your team and he ults someone, Kayn will now be perfectly on top of your opponent and follow them no matter what they do. Meaning that if you target your Kayn with F keys, you will also perfectly target your opponent. So you can follow this up by combining it with skill shots like Xerath ult, and now your ult has a complete aimbot. Have fun never falling for jukes again. Plenty of characters have controllable summons, and of course they have some weird quirks. Once again, Riot's consistency is lacking. When Daisy is sent off far away from Ivern, upon reaching a certain range, she will start to sprint back towards you to be within range of your control again. So you might expect this to also be the same with the other summons, but yeah. For some reason, when getting to max range, Tibbers and Shaco clone will just warp back to your character. And this is actually incredibly useful. We can manipulate this to make Tibbers catch up to us if he's lagging behind us while we're chasing someone down, but Shaco actually has a much more broken interaction. Because of Shaco's ability to stealth, you can make the clone instantly appear by sending it behind you when you Q forward. To your opponents, Shaco will simply appear as if he's leaving stealth, while in reality, the real Shaco is still hidden, waiting for their opponents to take the the bait. If you time this correctly, you can actually make the clone also instantly explode out of nowhere, essentially an invisible bomb. For more inconsistencies, we have a ton of cases where the animation that's playing just doesn't line up with what's actually happening. This is most notable by using movement abilities to buffer cast abilities, which will really throw off your opponents. For example, Caitlyn can cast E and Q at the same time. Her animation will start up and then Q fires, except it comes from the location that she started at before her E, not from her animation. This makes the animation look completely different and also almost impossible to react to. Ezreal has access to something very similar by using E and R together to get an invisible ult cast. For a lot of other champions, you can do something similar simply by using Flash. On Cassiopeia, you can ult and then use Flash, and if you do it at max range, you will simply just extend your reach, which isn't anything weird. But if instead you R and then flash over your cursor, the animation will play forwards while the ult hitbox actually goes behind you. There are lots of other similar interactions with other champions. Graves, for example, can R and flash over his cursor, which reverses the animation, but the hitbox goes in the way that actually makes sense. And speaking of confusing animations, something that no one thinks to use are the laugh, dance, and recall animations. Well, unless you're General Sniper. Disguising your animations with other similar animations is a really powerful technique. Riven recall animation looks like Windslash's startup, but most frequently I've also done this by canceling Elise auto attack animations to make it look like a cocoon. There are literally hundreds of ways to do this to bait your opponents into reacting to something that isn't actually happening. And that's it for this guide. League constantly manages to amaze me even after playing it for over a decade. I'm sure there are still hundreds of interactions left to be discovered, and new mechanics will be learned every year. And if you want to hyper accelerate that learning process, there's nothing better than our improvement service at skillcap.com. We not only offer the highest number of courses available online, covering literally everything you could ever want to know about the game, but they're also specifically designed to accelerate your improvement as fast as possible. Click the link in the description below to unlock the most extensive and effective training resource you'll ever find. And that'll do it for this one. We here at Skillcaps want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.